You are standing in a dry riverbed roughly 12,000 years ago in what is now the Jordan Valley. The sun has been up for 3 hours, and the temperature is already climbing past 40 degrees. Your tongue is swollen, your skin is dust, your child has stopped asking for water. The last spring you knew dried up 2 weeks ago. And the river you are standing in has not carried water since before your grandmother was born. You can dig down through the gravel with your hands. And if you are lucky, the sand turns damp. If you are very lucky, a thin pool gathers at the bottom of the hole. You cup it to your lips. It tastes of earth and minerals and survival. That hole in the ground is not a well, but it is the only reason you are still alive. And sooner or later, someone is going to figure out how to make it permanent. So, how did humans invent the well? The answer is not what you expect. It does not start with a farmer. It does not start with a plan. It starts with desperation. And it ends with the possibility of cities for most of human history. Water was something you found, not something you made. You followed it. You tracked elephants to know where the rivers were. You memorized the locations of springs, seeps, and seasonal pools. You learned which birds gathered at dawn, which insects swarmed near moisture, which plants grew only where roots could reach groundwater. You planned your entire existence around the movement of water across the landscape. Because water does not come to you, you go to it, and that fact dictated everything about how early humans lived. Nomadism was not a preference. It was a hydrological necessity. A band of hunter-gatherers could not camp more than a few days' walk from a reliable water source. Their territory was not defined by borders, it was defined by thirst. You did not own land, you owned knowledge of where the water was. And that knowledge died with you if you failed to pass it on. But then the climate changed around 14,700 years ago. The Earth began warming out of the last glacial maximum ice sheets. Retreated rain patterns shifted in the Levant, in the eastern Mediterranean, and across the Fertile Crescent. Something happened that had not happened in tens of thousands of years. The rain came down hard enough, and consistently enough, that water began pooling below the surface of the ground. In places where no spring existed, people started noticing that certain dry streams stayed damp longer than others, that certain depressions in the earth turned muddy days after the last rain. And eventually someone started digging, not drilling, digging with hands, with sticks, with sharpened stones, digging down into the damp sand, until the seep became a puddle, and the puddle became a pool. These were not wells in any modern sense. They were pits. They collapsed. They filled with sediment, they dried out. They had to be redug every season, but they worked. Once, twice, enough times that the idea took hold. Water was not just on the surface, water was under it. That realization is one of the most consequential cognitive leaps in human history. It is not obvious. A child looking at a dry desert does not intuit an underground lake. A wolf does not dig for water unless it smells it. The understanding that rain does not simply run off into rivers, that some of it sinks down through soil and gravel and collects in the spaces between rocks, that this hidden water can be accessed by digging deep enough, is abstract geology. It is inference. It is the first time a human mind mapped a resource it could not see, could not smell, and could not hear. They inferred the invisible. And then, around 10,000 years ago, people started building them to last at a site called Gesher in the Jordan Valley. A team led by archaeologist Yosef Garfinkel excavated something extraordinary, a shaft roughly 12 meters in diameter, carved through layers of clay and gravel down to the water table. It dates to the Pre-Pottery Neolithic, a period roughly 8,000 BC that makes it one of the oldest confirmed wells in the world. And here is the detail that matters. The people who dug it were not farmers, they were still hunter-gatherers, or at most incipient agriculturalists, living in a world without pottery, without metal. Without the wheel, they dug this shaft with stone tools and wooden digging sticks, through more than 4 meters of earth, until they hit water, and they lined the walls with mud bricks to keep the shaft from collapsing inward. Think about that, 4 meters straight down into unstable soil, in 40-degree heat, with no rope, no pulley, no light source except the sun at the surface. Every scoop of earth had to be carried up by hand. Every collapse had to be shored up before the digger at the bottom was buried alive. And they did it anyway, because the alternative was walking until you died. But the Gesher well is not the most famous early well. That distinction belongs to a site called Atlit Yam. Now submerged off the coast of Israel, it was discovered in 1984 by marine archaeologist Ehud Galili during a routine coastal survey. The site is a complete Neolithic village dating to roughly 6,900 BC, preserved underwater by rising sea levels, and at its center is a stone-lined shaft. 55 meters deep, built from undressed stones stacked and mortared together, the well was dug through clay into a freshwater aquifer, and it remained in use even after the village was gradually abandoned due to encroaching seawater. Galili's team found animal bones at the bottom, suggesting the well was still being maintained as the ocean crept closer. The villagers stayed until the salt water made the well undrinkable. That is how tightly survival was bound to that single shaft in the ground. When the well failed, the village died. And here is something else. In 2018, archaeologists in the Czech Republic unearthed the oldest known wooden well in Europe at a site called Ostrov near Sklpa. It was built from 4 oak logs, hollowed out with stone tools and fitted together at the corners with elaborate carpentry joints. Dendrochronology dated the wood to 5256 BC. That means a carpenter in the linear pottery culture, using nothing but stone adzes and an understanding of wood grain, built a watertight wooden box nearly 4 meters deep, lowered it into a shaft, and kept it from rotting for over 7,000 years. That is not luck, that is engineering. And here is the thing about wells that most people never consider. A well does not just provide water, it creates a fixed point in space. Before the well, your camp moved with the seasons. After the well, your camp has a center. A well is an anchor. It is the first piece of infrastructure that demands permanence. You cannot dig a 5-meter shaft and then decide to leave next week. The labor investment is too high. The well ties you to a specific patch of ground, and that ground, over time, becomes home. Archaeologist Overbar Yosef has argued that the transition from mobility to sedentism in the Levant was not driven by agriculture alone. It was driven by water security. People settled because they could. The well made settlement possible before farming made it necessary. But permanence has a price. When humans stopped moving, they started sharing their water with something else: parasites, bacteria, viruses. A stagnant well is a perfect incubator for disease. At Atalfyk in Turkey, one of the largest Neolithic settlements ever found, archaeologists have identified evidence of intestinal parasites in human coprolites, suggesting that concentrated populations sharing limited water sources were breeding grounds for infections that nomadic bands rarely experienced. The well gave with one hand and took with the other. It allowed density, and density allowed disease. The same trade-off that domestication made with pandemics, the well made with dysentery, cholera, and worms. And then there is the politics. A well is not just a hole, it is property. In a world where everyone is nomadic, water belongs to no one, and everyone. In a world with a well, water belongs to whoever controls the shaft. The well creates hierarchy, it creates guards, and ownership. And the first disputes over resource rights that are not about a deer carcass or a berry patch, but about the substance of life itself. The oldest written laws we have, the Code of Ur-Nammu and the better-known Code of Hammurabi, both contain clauses about well maintenance, water rights, and penalties for poisoning or blocking a neighbor's well. By 2000 BC, the well was already so central to civilization that it required legal protection. It had become infrastructure in the fullest sense, a system so essential that its disruption was a crime against the state. The engineering kept getting deeper. In the Indus Valley around 2600 BC, the people of Mohenjo-Daro built sophisticated wells lined with wedge-shaped bricks arranged in a perfect circle, with rope marks still visible on the inner walls from where buckets were lowered. Thousands of times some of these wells were connected to private bathrooms through baked clay drainage pipes, a level of water engineering that would not be matched in Europe for another 3,000 years. In Egypt, the shaduf, a counterweighted lever for lifting water, appeared by 2000 BC, allowing wells to be dug deeper than arm's reach. The Romans took it further, building aqueducts that fed into distribution cisterns, but they never abandoned the well. Roman military camps always included a well, dug by the legionaries themselves, sometimes to depths of 20 meters or more. The army that built roads across 3 continents still needed a hole in the ground to survive. And then, for a long time, nothing much changed. The well remained a hole, a rope, and a bucket for most of human history until 1808, when 2 American inventors, David and Joseph Ruffner, used a drill bit attached to a series of connected wooden rods to punch a 58-meter well through solid rock in West Virginia. It was not the first drilled well, but it was the one that proved the concept at scale. Mechanical drilling meant you no longer needed to dig. You could bore, you could go through bedrock, you could reach aquifers that hand. Digging could never touch. The artesian well was born, and with it, the modern water supply today. Roughly 2 billion people still rely on groundwater access through wells for their drinking water in rural India, in sub-Saharan Africa, in the American Great Plains. The well remains the difference between a community that thrives and one that withers. The technology has changed: PVC casing, electric pumps, submersible motors, but the principle has not. You dig down until you find water, you protect the shaft, you share it, or you fight over it. So, how did humans invent the well? They did not sit down and design it. There was no moment of inspiration, no lone genius staring at a dry riverbed and sketching a blueprint. The well emerged from need, from the slow realization that water was hiding beneath their feet. From the incremental discovery that a hole could be made permanent if you reinforced its walls. It was invented by people who were thirsty, who were dying, who had nowhere else to go. The well was not a triumph of engineering. It was a triumph of desperation. And without it, there would be no farms, no cities, no armies, no civilizations, just people walking toward the next river, hoping they get there before their children stop crying.